lot of people have trouble getting the head out because when they go to pull it out, oh, fell off, oopsies. But actually there's a trick to it. If you untab this panel first and then just keep rotating it down, it will push this head panel here without falling off. You then take this whole torso section and bring it up like so. Make sure the head's out of the way so you can take the entire torso section, rotate.
I'm going to regret this, aren't I?
1 hour later.
I believe in miracles!
Outside of 2 instances, I've always disliked the notion of parts forming. In fact, let me just bring up Titan's Return Overlord over here because I think he demonstrates my point quite well. The first instance is combiner parts forming. Under normal circumstances, if you let a certain piece of the combiner parts form or include combiner kibble, it's alright. Often it benefits the combiner in the long run. That also includes combining with an armoured trailer or armour pack or something very similar, sort of like Siege Jetfire does. The other instance where I find it perfectly okay is the use of a Headmaster or a Power Master. Years ago, I was really against the idea, but since going through Titan's Return, I've really come around to the concept. So given that those 2 are the only real cases of parts forming I usually enjoy, how did the weaponizers come across to me when they first got revealed? Well, at first, I was somewhat open to the idea. I mean, if I'd come around to the idea of Headmasters, maybe this weaponizer concept could win me over if it was done really well. But were they perfectly good toys? Well, no they weren't. Everyone seems to love Cog to bits, but I take a look at him and he just seems like a bunch of parts flopped around with very underwhelming vehicle modes and an also incredibly underwhelming robot mode. Besides, any toy that you've got to buy 15 of to get any fun out of doesn't really seem like a great idea. Six Gun definitely had a better assortment of guns, but he just felt so lackluster. The plastic quality was weak, the proportions looked hella off, the posability was very weird. I don't want to say limited, but it definitely was weird. Just in general, the Iron Factory version beats out the Siege version in every single way. To be honest, I was this close to checking out of the weaponizers concept completely and just moving on with what are obviously going to be better toys down the line, but against my better judgment, I decided to pick up the figure we'll be discussing today. Is he actually good? How does Hasbro use the final chance to present their weaponizers? Did they end on a high note, or did they just fail yet again? Well, greetings Cybertronians, I'm DrLockdown, and today's diagnosis pertains to Siege Deluxe Weaponizer Brunt. So, we've already had 2 strikes before we're out, and part of that comes down to the incredibly underwhelming vehicle modes. Especially on 6 Guns, but also to a certain extent on Cogs, they don't feel that cohesive. Yes, Cogs are barely passable, but come on. What am I looking at here? Am I supposed to give them a pass because they exist? More modes doesn't necessarily mean a better toy. So does Brunt finally break free from the garbage alt mode curse that has plagued the weaponizer line?
Hell yes!
Well, hell yes, but with a few caveats. From a conceptual standpoint, this is finally what I was looking for in the subline. See, when you have what is essentially a parts former, as opposed to a traditional transformer, the vehicle mode needs to provide some incentive over what a transformer can usually do. When you take COG's 2 alt modes, aside from maybe the arms, this really should have been able to transform without the removal of parts. It's almost like they had a transformer and just made the arms parts forming pieces to disassociate from the traditional transformation scheme. 6 Gun is even worse. When you consider the layout, this thing could easily have been a transformer. Had they added a hinge or 2 on the arms and redone the legs, they could have retained everything. So what makes Brunt negate this issue? Well, quite honestly, it's the way the legs become the cannon on the tip. Something like this isn't physically possible on a fully articulated transformer, so it provides something you normally wouldn't get on a toy in this size class. As someone who traditionally hates parts forming, I personally need something that deviates from the norm, and finally Brunt has given it to me. It probably helps that overall it's a pretty sweet alt mode. As far as space tanks go, this is definitely on the more distinct end of the spectrum. I go as far as saying that he brings more to the table than Voyager Megatron. He makes a clear effort to be something you wouldn't normally see on Earth, or at least present-day Earth. Some might think that it's thanks to the G1 source material, but honestly, that's a big fat nope. The original looked like a dumbass platform with a railgun on top with virtually no distinction from a space playset. This actually looks like a cohesive vehicle. I think that the rotating turret really sells you on the fact that this actually functions as a vehicle, although the far more pronounced tank treads definitely help on that matter. I don't even mind the odd placement of the cannon parts. I mean, if you really dislike it, you can put them together on the end, but honestly I find that looks dumb. One thing I do find odd though is that there's a port on the end that's the perfect size for a figure stand. Matter of fact, I just noticed it as I was writing the script and examining certain parts of the figure. I don't usually talk about figure stand placement, opting to show rather than tell, although yes, until recently I did forget about it altogether, but this just seemed too weird for me not to bring up. If we're talking about actual negatives though, as opposed to random oddities, there are definitely a few things that detract from the overall experience. The most prominent would have to be the solidity. It's passable, especially for what's primarily a parts former, but the waist section could definitely be more solid. If you're just displaying him or rolling him around, it's fine, but when you try to pick him up and mess with him, things tend to get misaligned. I think a few extra tabs on the arms and the backpack could have really sealed the deal for this vehicle mode, and the other flaws definitely seem negligible in comparison. In general, the paint doesn't seem bad, but it definitely feels like they prioritize the robot mode over the vehicle. The front of the cannon barely gets anything, save for the bronze paint on the tip, and the yellow overall does seem a little thin. I'm happy that it's not messy, and yellow is the hardest color to do, but another coat would definitely have benefited the end result. And where the f is the battle damage? I thought that was a staple of the line, but this figure almost feels embarrassed about it. This goes beyond prioritizing the robot mode. This is just straight up denying a feature that Siege has tried to promote. Even Siege Flywheels demonstrates the gimmick better than Brunt. F***ing flywheels! Although now that I am taking out the two toys to compare them, I am noticing a horrid stress mark on the jet component. Was that always there? Yeesh. Finally, the cannon isn't that solid either. It'll stay in place most of the time, at least more so than the waist assembly, but it would have been nice to have them lock in. That said, I understand why they didn't, given their purpose of articulation in robot mode. Still, an ever so slight shame. Faults and all though, Brunt is still a very solid alt mode. I really don't think it counts as being a faithful representation of the source material, because, well, the source material was quite shit. No, rather he's a perfect example of how generations should treat a character. Update them just enough while still retaining the essence of a character. And yes, the original character didn't have a robot mode, but that's what modern engineering is for, even if the engineering doesn't involve actual transformation. Size-wise, he's comparable to most deluxe figures when you get down to the nitty-gritty, but on first glance he might look substantially bigger. The cannon really lends itself to the illusion that this guy is bigger than he actually is, but when you examine him closer, he's no larger or smaller than what we've come to expect. So yes, right off the bat, this guy is a parts former, but one of the things he does that's different from the others is that he's far more engaging than his Autobot counterparts, and he parts forms in a way that wouldn't be achievable in an actual transformation, although I think I've said that at another point in this script, so I'll just get on with it. The first thing to disassemble is probably this entire platform here, and it's way easier in the long run if you just get the whole gun off first and then disassemble it. The one thing you don't have to assemble is the waist assembly. That remains exactly the same. On the topic of the waist assembly, you come around to the chest and you bring this peg out. You rotate this entire section down, rotate the waist 180 degrees, bring up the head, and come around to the back here and get these pegs out. You then take both of the feet, the one that rotates outward like that and has the peg there, folds in, and pegs into his left leg, our right, if you're looking right from the front. And then the other leg pegs on to his right, our left. You bring the two gun parts together like so, and then this is a real interesting thing. You actually rotate the backpack like that, so that this slot here is facing the 5mm peg, or you can do it to the other side if you really want to. You got the 5mm peg there, the 5mm port there, and that will actually give you enough clearance to peg it in properly. You've then got two pegs here and two ports there, and it just plugs in fairly simply. And while you're at the front here, you also push the 5mm peg back in to make it flush against the torso. Now, the R's are probably the most annoying parts of the transformation, because what you have to do is basically take these and pull them. So you see, here's the problem. You're supposed to pull the bicep out of the claw piece, but a lot of the time it'll just pull it right off the mushroom peg. It's actually really difficult on the camera, but it's 2 clicks. There's 1 click out, and then 1 click to lock it into place. From here, you just rotate it down to make the arm like so, and then you just use the 5mm peg to plug it right into that port there. Honestly, I have no clue what that port's there for, because it's not usable in robot mode, and in the gun mode it's a bit weird, but whatever. This just plugs right into there. And then last but not least, you got to do the same here. And there you have it, Brunt in his actually quite gorgeous robot mode. I really wasn't expecting to like it, especially with a lot of contradictions that I'll explain later, but hey, it really works. Under normal circumstances, a robot like this shouldn't work. He's a generic stocky Decepticon with an abundance of purple, not much of his secondary colour to break it up, and a face more derivative than Zurg. And at least that was for the sake of satire. We've already seen something like this done poorly with Full Tilt, who feels more at home with Combiner Wars Devastate than the Titan's Return line. Maybe the designers learned from their mistake with that figure though, as what we're left with instead is an impeccably sculpted, intricately painted, and expressively articulated beefcake! This is the first time I've seen a parts former truly take advantage of its parts forming elements to deliver something this posable, and every pose is accentuated by his amazing physique. On paper, the head should feel like a pale imitation of a Dalek without the pizzazz, but thanks to the paint it exudes so much more personality than it has any right to. The shoulders, being huge chunky purple blocks without the decency to include a Decepticon symbol, which is located on the chest for some reason, should feel bland and underdone. But thanks to the detail and the subtle addition of headlights, they add to his overall silhouette. The arms look amazing with their extra accents and huge emphasis on the treads. The hollow sections on the outside should be distracting, but honestly you never notice them. It's something I simply cannot explain. The chest should look way too thin as it consists of just a cylinder, and the backpack should have the same effect that SS-38 has, where it juts out way too far from the ab section, but somehow the two cancel each other out and it ends up looking perfectly natural. Similarly, the waist section should look way too thin, but the clever placement of the tank treads conceals such a thing. This figure is a collection of contradictions. Almost everything about it shouldn't work, but against the odds, it just works. I can't even complain about the kibble because, thanks to the parts forming nature, there is none. You can tell he turns into something, given the design cues of the tank treads and the chest detailing, but nothing's hanging off the back of the arms. It's quite astonishing, really. The paint is also really commendable, although it did have to come at the cost of the vehicle mode. Still, it's damn good that pretty much every surface from the front has some sort of detail paint. Maybe the pistons on his arms could have been given some extra silver, but that's virtually it. So, negatives. His backpack's at an odd angle? I don't know, man. For what I think is the first time in my reviewing career, there's just not much I can complain about. This isn't to say that the figure is without flaws, but rather that the flaws pertain to the vehicle mode and the transformation. Everything about this figure is, well, flawless. Not perfect, as there's more he could do, like adding some extra paint and articulation, but definitely flawless. After the first two frankly underwhelming weaponizers, Brunt was the last figure I expected to win me over, but, well, here we are. The more I mess with him, the more I like him. Even the articulation is amazing. I understand that Siege is based on articulation, and he's got no more or less than anyone else, but the tolerancing is really bloody good and the sculpting really accentuates it. The head is on a swivel, which is fair enough given the kind of sculpt he sports. He has universal shoulders, which utilize the 5mm connection ports, bicep swivels, and 90-degree elbows. No wrist swivel, but come on, it's a claw. What did you expect? The waist swivels with no issue, given the 5mm ports, and his hips are on universal joints. Again, the designers confirmed this line wouldn't be doing the whole ball joint thing. Watch my previous review for more info. His thighs swivel on concealed mushroom pegs. He has a 90-degree knee that can go further if you want to detach the calf for some reason. And he has a proper knee swivel! Not a fake one like Optimus Prime, no, this is an actual knee swivel that aids in the articulation in ways that a thigh swivel couldn't achieve. I was somewhat incorrect in my last review. Siege Optimus really only has 2 thigh swivels. This right here is an actual knee swivel, and it makes traditional standing poses so much cooler.
Also, he has an ankle tilt.
Honestly, there's not much I could really add to this. I thought maybe they could have gotten rid of this 5mm peg at the front to allow for a full ab crunch, but then I remember that the head would have still been on his inner section, so it wouldn't really have done jack shit. Size-wise?
Average.
There's really nothing special about his size, and since he's never really had a robot mode to begin with, scale isn't that much of a concept that the designers needed to consider. Not that I really care about scale to begin with. So what won me over personally was the amazingly solid robot mode, but funnily enough, apparently that's not the main draw of the set. Based on the combat system, haha hilarious, you're supposed to break him down into a bunch of parts and stick them onto other Transformers. It's the whole reason why we don't have ball joints. I want to say that I've been completely won over by them, but honestly I still find the concept a little stupid. I will say though that overall it does execute this gimmick the best out of the 3. The claw pieces actually look good on other Transformers and put 6 Gun's singular claw to shame. You get the same cannon as in the vehicle mode, which is maybe why they included the figure stand port to make some kind of rocket accessory, and if you want to add articulation to it, you can always use the backpack edition. The thighs make a passable turret if you keep the 5mm pegs out, and the chest, oh my god, it actually turns into something! See, the one thing I never really liked about Cog, Okay, one of the many things I didn't like about COG was the fact that you were always left with this random waste piece that didn't really do anything. Six Gun was able to negate this, but honestly, Six Gun is kinda shit. This is the first time that this gimmick has been executed to its fullest extent, and honestly, if the others handled it this well, then I'd be way more into them. And yes, I understand that you can make incredibly amazing things if you buy multiples of these figures, and hell, even Hasbro knows it.
I saw somebody who took an Optimus and built a trailer out of comics online. It was crazy. Wow.
Yeah,
it was awesome. Yeah, it was really, really cool.
I take issue with that mentality though. A toy really should be solid on its own without needing several of them to truly make something special. If a toy on its own is disappointing, then it isn't worth buying once, let alone 3 times or even 10 times. Brunt is by far the only one that makes his $35 price point worth it. You don't need a billion of him to have fun. As said before, he just works. Hell, I'd be down for buying another repaint. I hear there's a Power Dasher coming in a box set somewhere, so that might be cool.
Oh wait, here's a COG repaint, and it's garbage. Wow, 2/3 of your f***ing box set is utter trash. Great job, marketing team!
Again, I'm usually a person who despises parts forming, but Brunt here has won me over completely. I wouldn't quite give him a 5 out of 5 because there are issues with the vehicle mode and the transformation, and that's not even considering the parts forming, it's just the way the arms function is a bit awkward. But putting my general dislike for the concept aside, it is a really good figure. If this truly is the final weaponizer mold that Hasbro gives us in this line, then what a way to end on. Granted, the 2 previous weaponizers were pretty terrible in the grand scheme of things, but that doesn't matter. Who knows? Maybe one day he will reign as the true great weaponizer of the line, and COG will be forgotten completely. Or maybe COG will get a shitty repaint and G1 fans will froth at the mouth and will learn nothing. Oh,